some tips. I'll give you some tips about writing for a general audience. I will talk about the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, which is a great place to exercise those skills. And I'll give a quick overview of my career to give you a sense of ways to get involved with science policy. So first, I'll talk a little bit about scientific writing, which is what I believe most of you will be familiar with, scientific or academic writing, which can be characterized in a few ways. So first, it has this introduction that's focused on background and state of the art. Here, you're trying to communicate that you know what the research community has been looking at and what is leading up to your work. Then there's an extensive description of the methodologies. This is how you demonstrate your rigor, your credibility as a scientist, and the results and impact, that is your relationship to the rest of the field, is left to the end. By contrast, when you look at writing for a broad audience, you can think of the inverted pyramid. This is from what journalists use to structure their writing. Here, they prioritize the most newsworthy info or the concrete details. So that's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Then they move on to important details. And it's only at the end that they start talking about that background. So it's almost flipped from how scientific writing works. To talk about these characteristics in more detail, it's why should you care is upfront. And regardless of whether it's journalism or it's writing for policymakers, this impact, this thing about why you should care really needs to be prioritized, which is something that academic writing and scientific writing doesn't do. So that's one thing you really have to train yourself on and think about as you're working. And it has a different assumption of a reader attention span. So as scientists and academics, we know other scientists and academics will read through all of our work because that's part of the scientific community, that's part of the engagement with peer review. Meanwhile, for policymakers, for journalism, you can only assume a brief bit of reader attention span. So that's why so much of this impact and why you should care is up front. So really a key thing here is prioritizing that impact over the methodology. The methodology is crucial for communicating your merit and the merit of your work and yourself to other scientists, but it's not as meaningful to broad audiences, and in particular, not as meaningful to policymakers. And the finer details come later. So all that extra context, all this stuff that we put in the introduction and background section in academic writing really goes toward the end often. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'll show you an exercise from a class I taught in communications. Here I've color-coded an academic paper regarding the background, methods, and results. So as you can see, about half of the paper is methods in blue, shown in the top few pages, and the rest of it is results. In this class, I wanted students to tone down academic writing, present it for a general audience as a summary. And so here's an example of what that looked like. And as you can see, the methods had to shrink considerably. And while this isn't the exact same as writing a policy brief or an op-ed, it's a good indication of what I'm talking about, where the methods is so important for communicating with other scientists, but should not be your focus when communicating with policymakers and general audiences. So here's some tips for effective writing with general audiences. So first and foremost, determine your audience. Who are you writing to and why are you writing to them? A key thing to think about, especially in science policy discussions, is who are you as a messenger? Are you a neighbor? Are you an arbiter? Or are you an outsider? Because that changes the kind of writing you do and the kind of reception you can expect for your writing. Next, again, I can't keep hammer this home enough, but communicate impact. For policy writing, that'll be economics, that'll be articulating stories of people and communities in need and how your policy proposals will help them. And for op-eds, that's more about capturing emotion and narrative, using rhetorical techniques to draw your reader in and make them feel persuaded by your argument. The biggest thing I can tell you is to avoid jargon. Again, jargon is really useful in the scientific community to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about and that you're part of this community. But for broad audiences, jargon only serves to exclude and confuse. You really can translate this information without dumbing it down, without using jargon. And that's one of the easiest ways to make sure that your writing is accessible to a broad audience. You should think of your reader as an intelligent, curious person who knows nothing at all about this topic. If they know nothing at all, they're not going to know those specific technical words that define your science. Make calls to action specific so we really know what you're talking about, what you're working on. Think about how you're using data. How many examples do you provide? Which examples do you provide and why? just in the same way that you'll do many experiments or read a whole lot of papers, but when you ultimately publish, you only publish on the most meaningful and impactful results. You want to have a similar idea when you're writing for a general audience, thinking about, okay, these 3 points really communicate the impact of what I'm talking about, how it affects people, how it helps them, how it changes the game. And then think a lot about brevity, how long your total work is, how long individual paragraphs and sentences are. This is a good way to keep reader engagement high. And also how you distribute your writing, what you tend to focus on. That's what I mean by real estate. And if you have more questions about that, we can follow up about it later. But one of the biggest things I can give to any writer in any field, in particular for scientists working and talking to general audiences, is to read your work out loud and then read it out loud again. If you stumble while you're reading it out loud, there's a good chance you have either some syntax errors or something that is making it hard for your reader to read it as well. So definitely read that out loud and think about where it gets tripping you up and what you can do to improve it. Okay, so those are all useful tips. Forgive me for rushing a little, just want to make sure we can get through as much of this as possible in the remaining time. But how can you put these tips into practice? So one is what you're doing right now. It's great to come to conferences like this, do more of that. Second, get involved in your local community. So that's university organizations. There's lots of science policy clubs at universities across the country and across the world. The National Science Policy Network also can help you get in touch with people who want to work on science policy near you, and also your local government. There's lots of town boards and community groups that would be interested in a scientific input on issues that they care about. Publish op-eds. So this isn't exactly policy writing, but it's where science impacts a community. And it's remarkably easy to get op-eds published, especially in your university newspaper, in your local newspaper, because you're an expert, you're really working on these issues. And this also brings up that idea, again, of where you're a neighbor. An op-ed gives you an opportunity to say, I'm from this community, this is why I care about this issue, and publish it there. And finally, there's lots of places to publish policy memos, like the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, where I work, as well as Frontiers and SciTech Forefront. But there's all kinds of venues that are interested in documents that are dedicated to science policy specifically. On that note, I'll segue to talk a little bit about the JSPG and what we do. We're internationally recognized. We partner with lots of major organizations like the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or the UK Science Innovation Network, or the Inter-America Institute for Global Change Research. Lots of international partnerships, and we publish peer-reviewed research publications. We are a vehicle specifically designed for early career researchers writing about the intersection of science and policy. And we help you connect with policy organizations and promote issues you care about. And we also try to give you an opportunity to connect with those organizations and present your work on a larger scale. So we publish all kinds of things, op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos on all kinds of topics. So this is a quick smattering of topics that we've covered in the past, and you can see it really runs the gamut. So there's no one thing that you have to write about to be included in a journal like JSPG. We publish 4 to 6 issues a year, which can have an open call for submissions or can be partnered with a special organization and dedicated to a specific topic. We currently have an issue, a special issue open, for example, on global security and how science can inform that conversation. To publish with us, you must be one of the following: current student, postdoctoral, associate, policy fellow. Really, it's all about early career professionals. Or journals like Frontiers are more dedicated to established professionals, whereas we're really focused on helping students, helping early career professionals get their work published in this space. Right now, we have plenty of workshops that you can participate in. So we just had a writing workshop, but we also have webinars on the special topics that we're interested in, such as policy and governance on science and technology, foreign policy and national security coming up in late March and April. You can publish with us. We have 3 calls for submissions open right now. So one is, as I mentioned, on global security, that's due at the end of April. We have a summer standard issue due at the end of May and another one at the end of November. And we have those standard issues again every May and November. And we have, again, 4 to 6 issues every year that you can participate in. And we also have opportunities to work with us. So we have an open call for associate editors right now. So you can join the journal as an editor. That was recently extended to March 26th. But if you can't make that deadline, we'll have another call for associate editors in September. You can also join us as an ambassador working in different roles within the journal. This was going to be a quick explanation of some of the work you can do as an editor, where I was sharing an executive summary from a policy memo when it was initially submitted and after editing, and just some of the things that you would be focusing on as an editor are brevity, focus. So here they were crafting the opening sentence to make it much more specific to the topic, and really specificity and tailoring to your audience. So there's some language issues that they sharpened up here, which I'd be happy to share with anyone later, since we're short on time. And here's a quick note on what I look for in submissions, because this can help inform your writing in a lot of ways. Topic, is the problem and are the audience clearly identified? This helps for all kinds of writing. Who are you writing for and what are you writing about? You should know this, and it should be very clear to your reader and to yourself. And are the ideas novel? Are you engaging with what's happening right now in the field and proposing something new? For argument, I want to see a good number of research, especially because you're coming to this as an academic or a scientist. I want to see high quality references and a good amount of them. And a focus, I want introduction and background that uses relevant info and a smooth logical transition between ideas. A quick tip I can give here is if you summarize every paragraph into an individual sentence and then look at those sentences in order, you can get a sense for how your paper is flowing. And sometimes you'll see, oh, this paragraph is actually quite a tangent and I should rework it. Finally, I really look at usefulness. Do you propose specific policy recommendations? Do you evaluate the pros and cons of these recommendations? And do you look at obstacles in implementation? These are key details for any policy analysis that really help you communicate not only the value of what you're doing, but how it would work in the real world. I'm running slow on running out of time, so I just want to highlight two things about my career trajectory that I think would be valuable to this audience. So my PhD was in chemical and biomolecular engineering. My postdoc that I'm working on now is in technology policy, thinking about the ethics and regulation of emerging technologies and how they impact society. As you can tell, those are different fields. And I think that's a really interesting thing that you can do with science policy is you can really incorporate a lot of different skill sets because they're looking for your expertise as a scientist and your ability to be interdisciplinary, to combine different ideas together. This is just a quick overview of how I got to where I am. I went through a sort of 5-step process as I defined it. So exploring what the field was like through talks like this, attending things in more detail, so weekend and one-day workshops like ComSciCon and policy hackathons, doing coursework, later publishing, and then joining leadership positions. And then this is the last thing I want to point out before I leave you, but you'll hear a lot about science policy fellowships, which are terrific, and you should absolutely explore those. The AAAS is the gold standard there, but there's lots of excellent opportunities at the state level in California, New Jersey, Missouri, and elsewhere. But don't forget about postdoctoral positions. So a lot of the airspace really gets dedicated to policy fellowships, which are so valuable, but you can be really effective and interested in postdocs as well, usually ones that are focused in science and technology studies. So science and technology studies will look at the history and context of science, but it also looks at the impact of science on society, which is a major part of what science policy is all about. Some organizations that I recommend in Europe where there's a lot of this activity are the University College London STEEP program. So that's science, technology, engineering, and public policy. There's also lots of great programs for STS in the UK at Edinburgh, Sussex, York, and the Oxford Internet Institute. But there's stuff elsewhere as well. So I'm in association with the TU Delft Technology and Policy Management Department, Sciences Po in France, and the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society. With that, I'll wrap up. I don't know if we have time for questions, but you can please feel free to email me with any questions you might have. You can connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And also be sure to sign up for the JSPG newsletter, where you'll find out about lots of workshops, lots of opportunities to connect and publish your work and find more ways to pursue science policy. Thanks so much. And again, apologies about the time issues.
I think we have time for one question. Any takers?
So you talked about making sure to outline any barriers that might come up in writing. And as someone who's currently in a PhD program, I don't have any experience with what sorts of problems any particular policy might run into from a governmental or like policy implementation point of view, how do you recommend learning about that and getting experience in that area?
That's a terrific question, because a lot of this is a learning opportunity, especially as the students. And that's another reason why I would encourage you to check out JSPG, because it's all about students who don't have that expertise, but are still publishing meaningful work. So take a look at our publications in the past and see how others have engaged with it. Attend some of our workshops to hear the kinds of ideas we want you to engage with. But a lot of it is, when you're publishing this kind of work, it's theoretical. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen. So it's sort of working through the process of what are some of the tack-on or domino effects of what you might institute. What are potential conflicts that other stakeholders might have with the policies you're proposing? Because, for instance, what industry feels about a given issue might be very different than what civil society feels about an issue. So you want to be addressing those tensions in your work, which doesn't necessarily require expertise, but does require a meaningful engagement with what everyone feels about the issue, what they've said and done about it. So that's what I would recommend, is reading up on some of our work, but also doing that intellectual work of thinking what others would how they would react to your policy proposals.
Thank you.
I guess we'll wrap it up. Andy, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
It was my pleasure. And again, apologies about the timing issue. And I hope all of you have a good day and enjoy the conference. Please feel free to connect if you have any questions.
Have a good day. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Christine Kirchhoff. I'm going to get your slides.